Hi, welcome to the channel. This is one of the questions which I've been thinking about it from past couple of days, and I was thinking how could I have started the DevOps journey again if I have to start it again. And I was pondering on this, and while pondering, I was thinking I should make a video on this. So I made this video, and I think this would be useful for you as well if you are a beginner in DevOps. I've chalked out a complete plan how to start with DevOps and how to start with tools and all in this video. So let's get into the video and let's see what is there in this video. Mistakes I did as a beginner in DevOps. Like what would have I done differently now? Like what difference I would have implemented, what difference I would have changed in me to learn DevOps again, like from starting. I would say there are many things. I would have stuck to basics in the beginning and then moved on to advanced level at the time progresses. I would say that, but yeah. So I directly jumped into container world immediately without understanding what are basics. That's the mistake. That's the biggest mistake which I did into DevOps field. I jumped into containers. I directly jumped and started learning Docker and Kubernetes, and didn't understand what is happening underlining what is happening. I didn't understand like what's happening, what are servers and why containers are required. I didn't know anything. I just started learning Kubernetes and Docker. That's the biggest mistake which I did, I feel, because I could have started with something basic such as Linux. Like I should have learned Linux very well. Like from kernel level debugging, I should have done like at the kernel, not at kernel level, but basic understanding of Linux at the admin level, creating a user or adding network or doing network level and using network level commands. So these are the things which I thought I should have done, and I would recommend you to learn Linux first. And then after learning Linux first, I would like you to move to virtualization and understand what is virtualization, why virtualization was brought into existence. Yeah. So what is EXXI server and what is hypervisor? What is VMware? Why VMware was brought into picture? So you will understand all these things by virtualization. And once virtualization is completed, I would recommend you to learn computer networking. I would say computer networking is the heart of the topic here. So if you understand computer networking, you understood everything. That's what I say. So computer networking is the key. I would like you to understand what are like how network flows, like how the traffic comes through IP to application. That's all you will understand you through computer networking. You will understand what are routers, what are switch, and also you will understand all these things. These are the basics which I want you to understand. I will start with Linux because Linux is the most used OS in the world. If you see in servers, if you see 90% of servers runs Linux, mostly around 90% of server runs Linux. So I would recommend you to learn Linux. Start with basic commands and don't go into debugging. Start with basic commands like how to copy a file, how to move a file, how to rename a file. Yeah, and try to add users and remove user and try to set passwords for that user. Like admin level tasks you can do at first and try to learn all these things, and then later move on to debugging part. Like SSH connectivity is not happening to a server. Like how would I debug? Those kind of thing you can do. Yeah. And late in virtualization, I would say you learn what is virtualization. Like while virtualization was brought into picture. Yeah, I started my career into DevOps 5 years back, and I was into a project called as I was into project by Bits Pilani. So I was handling their learning portals. I was handling their complete slot booking for labs purpose. I was handling their complete that portal. I was handling completely. It was on virtualization. Applications were hosted on a server, and that server then virtualization was implemented on server using overt, then open source tool similar like VMware. So that's how I learned little bit of virtualization there. Yeah, so that's how it is. try to understand the basics first, and then move to public cloud. I would suggest you to move to public cloud immediately after learning basics. Like choose one cloud and learn basics thoroughly. There are many clouds, but I only listed out 3 clouds, but there are many clouds available. Like IBM cloud, there is IBM cloud, and there is some other cloud as well, which I have not listed here, but you could use that as well. Or learn one cloud focused and completely. So let's suppose you are learning AWS. So if you're learning AWS, try to learn basics like create an instance, create VPC, create subnets, and then try to add instance into that subnet, and create VPC peering create 2 VPCs in 2 regions and try to peer the VPC, and then try to create EBS for storage, and try to create load balancers for managing traffic between the server. You can use all these things to learn cloud and learn basics thoroughly. I don't say all the services you should know. I would say around 15 to 20 services which are very prominent you should know. And then I would also recommend you to learn Route 53 as well, very well, because you should understand how traffic is coming into your servers and all, right? So you should learn Route 53 as well. And after this, I would like you to automate the infra creation, automate the things which you learned. I would like you to automate it using Terraform and Ansible. Like for creation of the resources, you can use resourcing cloud. You can use Terraform. For configuring the resources, like let's suppose I create an instance and install Nginx in that. I would create a resource using Terraform and then create and configure Nginx using Ansible. So I'll try to use mix of both. I'll try to mix these tools both and try to use it all together. So whatever I learn here, I'll try to implement it using automation tools such as Terraform and Ansible. Once this is done, I would like you to host an application using Nginx. I would like you to host an application in private subnet with NAT gateway enabled, where NAT gateway is enabled to fetch the packages and repositories from the internet for the server, and try to create Nginx in public subnet and try to do a reverse proxy for your application, and your application should be accessible on Nginx IP, public IP. So try to do that. So try to host an application, a simple application using Nginx as a reverse proxy for an entire application. Yeah, once this is done, I would recommend you to enable Prometheus and Grafana on servers. Like your application is running on servers, right? I would like you to enable Prometheus and Grafana on your application, on your server. So I would like you to install Prometheus and Grafana on the server. Configure Prometheus and Grafana on server, or EC2 instance, you can say. So you should understand what is Prometheus.yaml file and what is Grafana dashboard JSON files. You should understand all these things. Rather than moving into Kubernetes and learn Prometheus stack, it's better to learn these things manually here and then move to Kubernetes. I would suggest you to enable Prometheus monitoring purpose. For monitoring purpose, I would suggest you to use Prometheus and Grafana. Yeah, Prometheus and Grafana, it is not application level monitoring. It is just infra level monitoring which it gives. Like it gives the number of nodes available in the cluster, or it gives the CPU or memory consumed or used by the server. It will give all those information. Infra level information it will give Prometheus and Grafana. You can use it for that. For application level, it's better not to get into application level logging purpose right now. But you can do it if you want. You can do it. You can configure 𝐿𝐾 stack for your application which you have deployed. You can configure 𝐿𝐾 stack for your application, which I have not mentioned here, but I would suggest you to configure 𝐿𝐾 stack for your application. And then after this, I would recommend you to deploy 3-tier application on cloud with domain and SSL certificate. And you would use Terraform and Ansible. Terraform to provision the complete cluster, and try to use Ansible to configure the record application using playbooks. I would ask you to learn playbooks, writing playbooks, and try to learn roles and what are Ansible roles, why are they required. You should learn all these things in Ansible and Terraform. Yeah, so it's better to deploy 3-tier application on cloud with domain and SSL. After this is done, I would recommend you to use Jenkins. Jenkins for the same purpose. Jenkins for deploying application on server using Terraform and Ansible. Again, using Terraform and Ansible, you would again integrate with Jenkins to create 3-tier application on cloud for CI/CD purpose. Yeah. So after this is done, I would recommend you to move to Docker. And in Docker, I would recommend you to understand what is Docker file. What are the elements in Docker file? What is run? What is from? What is CMD? What is copy? What is add? You should understand each and every file of that, and you should be able to write Docker file. And after this, I would also recommend you to learn Docker networking as well. Like how many types of networking in Docker. After this, there is Docker storage as well, which you have to learn. Get into container in depth, like learn what are C groups, what are network namespaces. You should understand all these things in Docker. So after this, I would recommend you to create a Kubernetes cluster on cloud using Minikube or KubeADM. Like I would recommend you to hardware, right? So I would recommend you to use Minikube or KubeADM for cluster creation purpose. Minikube you can use for single node server, and multi-node servers you can use KubeADM. And in tandem, I would encourage you to learn Amazon EKS or AKS or GKE as well to create clusters in Azure, Amazon or Google Cloud. So once this is done, I would recommend you to create Kubernetes cluster, KubeADM cluster using Terraform and Ansible in combination of both. Like with using Terraform, you would create the resources in cloud, and using Ansible, you would configure the Kubernetes cluster. And this is a good activity which will give you a deep understanding of Terraform and Ansible, how Terraform and Ansible are used. Yeah, so there's a deep understanding of, this will give you a deep understanding of how a Kubernetes cluster is created using Terraform and Ansible. It's a KubeADM cluster which you can, I would recommend you to use KubeADM as a approach to create Kubernetes cluster, as it is open source, and it will give you a good understanding of what's happening in the cluster. Once this is done, I would recommend you to configure external storage for the cluster. Like after KubeADM cluster is set up, or EKS cluster is set up, or AKS cluster is set up, it's better to use external storage for your stateful applications, right? I would recommend you to use EBS as a external storage for your application, or create NFS server locally. Like you can have one node as NFS, and then you can configure it as NFS server, and then you can add Kubernetes nodes as NFS client. Or you can add EBS as a external storage for Kubernetes cluster using EBS CSI driver, which has to be installed using Helm. So yeah, using Helm, you should just install EBS CSI driver, and using EBS CSI driver, it will automatically provision the storage in the cluster, automatically provision the storage in cloud. So this is how you configure external storage for your cluster. It's a good practice actually. So it's for stateful application. It's an entire cluster which you are creating, end-to-end entire cluster. Yeah. So after this, I would recommend you to learn Kubernetes. Kubernetes components, it's very important to learn Kubernetes components such as Kubernetes control planes, wherein some control planes such as kube server, kube scheduler, or kube controller, or etcd. You should understand what are these components and why are they used. You should understand all these things, and you should also understand data plane components such as kube proxy or container runtime engine. You should understand all these things, and you should understand what is kubelet, and you should understand like what's the functions of kubelet. And apart from this, you should understand what is stateful set, what is deployment, what is the difference between them, both of them, why are they used, and you also understand what is secrets and config maps, and how different they are and how they are used in applications. And you should also understand what are daemon sets and what are replica sets. Once this is done, I would recommend you to learn Kubernetes networking in thorough, like very thoroughly. I would recommend you to learn like how pod to pod communication is happening, how pod to node communication is happening, how application is getting access from internet, and how route is flowing from load balancer to pod. Like you should understand all these things, and you should also understand readiness probes and liveness probes. Some of the probes you should understand. So I didn't add that, but I would recommend you to learn probes also. And CPU memory request and limits also you should learn. And also you should learn rollout strategies such as blue green or canary. There's some of the rollout strategy which we deploy for application deployment. So I would recommend you to learn that. And after that, I would recommend you to learn what are namespaces, and also recommend you to learn different types of services in Kubernetes like a cluster IP, node port, load balancer, and Ingress as well. I've added Ingress as well, right? So Ingress, that fourth one. So you should understand what are Ingress and what is the type of Ingress we should use, like in Nginx Ingress controller or AWS load balancer controller. So it would create a resource as load balancer in cloud. So you should also understand what are static pods which are managed directly by kubelet. You should understand why they are used, and also like why they are used and why it comes back when we delete it. So you should understand each and every component thoroughly. And also you should understand a little bit of Helm, because you'll be using Helm for deploying Prometheus stack, or just now I said, right, EBS CSR driver, or Nginx Ingress controller. Also Helm will be used. Helm charts will be there already there, so we'll be using Helm charts for that. So you should understand what is Helm and why are they used, and it's a package manager which can be used for Kubernetes cluster. So you should understand what is Helm also. So learn these components thoroughly. There are some of the components I've listed which can be learned thoroughly, and after this, try to deploy Prometheus and Grafana on Kubernetes using Prometheus stack available open source officially. So you can use it, as you already knew how to deploy Prometheus and Grafana on servers, right? So it becomes easy for you to deploy Prometheus and Grafana on Kubernetes cluster now. So you do this to check the resources at the pod level or node level. Yeah, so we can check the resources, like how much resource is given to the pod or how much resource is given to the node. You can check at the node level or pod level using an exporter called a node exporter, which we deploy on each nodes, which will just scrape the metric and send it to Prometheus, and Prometheus will give it in dashboard. And but we use Grafana for dashboard, right? Visualization purpose we use Grafana. So you should understand all these things, and you should also understand like uh, PromQL queries. You should be able to write a little bit of PromQL queries, and Grafana as well. Grafana, you should know what is JSON file. Like it's a dashboard. When we create dashboard, it is created in JSON file, right? You should understand how that JSON files are created and how are they displayed. You understand all these things. After this, I would try to deploy. I would ask you to deploy an application on Kubernetes and expose it on different services such as node port or load balancer, and try to access it through internet. This would give you a good understanding of how communication is happening between pods and node, from node, like node to pod, or pod to node, or from load balancer to service, like how communication is happening via domain name, like internal domain name which Kubernetes give. Service discovery, you will understand all these things here. It's a good activity. After this is done, I would ask you to deploy application on Kubernetes and add domain and SSL for that. After this, I would ask you to deploy Nginx Ingress controller and Ingress controller in our cluster, and try to expose the application and try to add domain name and SSL certificate for your application. Yeah, so after this is done, I would recommend you to do this activity very well. After this, I would ask you to create a Jenkins pipeline, CI/CD a pipeline to deploy application on Kubernetes and add domain. This is the overall area wherein we will use many tools in this. We'll be using Docker, we'll be using Terraform, we'll be using Kubernetes, we'll be using Ansible, we'll be using Jenkins, Prometheus, Grafana. All these tools we'll be using, and try to deploy application, CI/CD application on Kubernetes, and add a domain and SSL certificate for your application. And one tool I forgot to add is Argo CD. We can include Argo CD as well to maintain the state of the cluster. We'll sync with GitHub and try to maintain the state of the cluster. This is the overall picture of what we can do here. So this is the overall steps or theory or overall flow which I would follow again to do a DevOps engineer job from starting. If I have to start my DevOps journey again, I would start like this. I would start with I start with Linux virtualization, computer networking, and then move to public cloud, any of the public cloud, and then try to automate that public cloud using Terraform and Ansible, and learn Terraform and Ansible thoroughly, each and every component. After that, try to host an application using Nginx. After that, try to add Grafana, Prometheus for that application, and try to deploy 3-tier application on cloud with domain and SSL certificate. In this, you will try to understand what is Cert Manager as well. That's one of the services in AWS. That's a good understanding which you will get. So this is through CI/CD I'll be doing it, and after this I'll try to understand what is Docker file, Docker networking, Docker network, Docker storage. After that I'll try to move to Kubernetes and try to understand the cluster, configure storage, and try to learn the components, and then try to enable Prometheus Grafana for my cluster. After that I'll try to expose my services, and then move to Kubernetes deployment. So my last point is Kubernetes container. My first point is Linux. That's how I would again try to start. If I have to start it again, I would try to start it like that. Like my first point would not be container. My first point would be Linux, and then try to get into deeper into that, and then try to learn virtualization. So that's how the overall flow which I would follow. And these are some of the resources which I have found in YouTube, which are free, mm, which I feel you should learn to get understanding of these tools which I mentioned. You'll get a good understanding of the tools mentioned here by these videos. These are all free. You can search some other videos also, but these are some of the best resources which are available on YouTube, I feel. So I'll add it in description as well. Yeah, that's how this is the overall idea of what I would do again if I have to do DevOps engineer role as a beginner. How I would start my journey. This is how I would start my journey. uh, this is how I'll start my journey. So that's the overall idea of what I wanted to say.